So as British Columbians know, the Site C dam has been a contentious issue ever since John Horgan was put into power by Andrew Weaver and the Green Party. However, what we do know so far is that the delays have cost taxpayers so far at least $600 million as we wait to find out whether John Horgan and NDP will scrap the project. We've seen a report from the BC Utilities Commission. We've seen a counter report from the Allied Trade Council. Now, with more on this, is our friend, and for the first time joining us here on The Rebel, is Kris Sims, the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and a familiar face to many of us if you remember her from the Sun News days. Kris, great to be with you today. You wrote an op-ed in the province earlier in November talking about how if British Columbia cancels Site C, we might be going down the same dangerous path Ontario went down with the green energy schemes, in believing that we can simply phase out these baseload sources of power and replace them with alternatives. Maybe give British Columbians a little preview of what happened in Ontario and why this is such a similar situation playing out here in BC.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And I spent most of my years growing up here in British Columbia, but as many people know, I've spent about 16 years or so living mostly in Ontario. And so I got to see firsthand what happened there with their hydro disaster. Now, for people in British Columbia, this may come as a surprise, but a lot of people in Ontario are living in energy poverty. Energy poverty. Food banks are having record lineups. Businesses are shutting down, packing up, in some cases moving across the border to the United States, and even in some cases to Quebec. People are actually moving their homes across the river, if they can, over to Quebec, and most of that is because of hydroelectricity prices, which have more than doubled and in some cases tripled for some families. The main reason for that is because they turned away from some of their more traditional, as you would call it, base load sources of electricity and embraced green technology in wind and solar. The catch here, though, is the way that they embraced it. In some cases, they signed 30-year contracts with prices that are just astronomical. We can get into that a little bit later, but basically, they took the market rate and exponentially inflated it and then guaranteed that rate to the people that they signed the contracts with. And that leaves Ontario hydro customers paying the bill.
So as it relates to British Columbia, we already know that that BC Hydro has estimated that there would be a 10% rate hike. I think that's kind of low, probably, if this project's canceled. When you see the sort of parallels between the two provinces, do you think John Horgan and the NDP are willing to learn a lesson from what happened in Ontario? Or do you think that they're going to repeat the same mistakes and simply blindly turn to wind, solar, and alternatives? Where do you think they stand on that right now?
Well, we hope that they won't blindly turn towards that. And I've had conversations even with Green Party leader Andrew Weaver, who said, you know what, they've made a disaster of things in Ontario. I don't know if he used that word exactly, but he fully understood and he really seemed to get it. He said, you know what, we want green alternatives. And I took him at his word. He seemed very sincere about it. He said, but we realize that the way Ontario went is not the way to go. My concern, though, is that we don't have really good other examples in other provinces across Canada. The main example we have of a major province like Ontario, a huge manufacturer, embracing green technology has been a disaster. And that's why I wrote the article, is to warn people not necessarily away from green technology and alternatives, but the way that they did it. And the way that they did it in Ontario is something called the Global Adjustment Fee. So if you take your market rate for energy, round about 2 cents per kilowatt hour. In some cases, they signed solar contracts for 80 cents per kilowatt hour for 30 years. That leaves the ratepayer with a 78-cent difference, a markup to pay every single month for energy that they never use. And Bonnie Lysyk, the Auditor General in Ontario, says by the time they're done this scheme, Ontario ratepayers will have been overcharged more than $130 billion. That is what these poor folks are forking over now in Ontario. And that's why I just wanted to sound the alarm saying, if you guys want to turn away from a massive hydroelectric dam like Site C, which has guaranteed power, something that we're used to dealing with here in British Columbia, and you want to turn towards wind and solar, don't do what Ontario did.
I think that's a very clear message that needs to sort of resonate through the decision makers on this project. Now, I want to get a little bit onto something that's a little bit we've kind of mentioned before, that You know, it's not that necessarily that this project is going to be a great deal for British Columbian taxpayers. It is being built by a crown corporation. But are we really at the point now, we're at the point of no return on this project, that simply canceling it or delaying it, as the BCUC report said, is actually the worst deal for taxpayers, even if there are cost overruns if we just simply complete the project?
Delaying it, from the sounds of it, based on that report, just results in a slow bleed, right? It's that you're kind of halfway pregnant. You've boarded things up, you've kind of put tarps over things, and now you're just waiting. That still costs a lot of money. And then also, as taxpayers and as the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we're wincing because we've already put billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars into this, and if we come up with nothing, if we cancel it outright, we literally have nothing to show for it. And so we've got a huge caution light on this. We're not super fans of this project because it costs a ton of dough. But if at the end of the day, we come up with a hydroelectric dam that can provide sustainable and affordable power, we don't start gouging customers because of it, then we're willing to say, you know what, just bite the bullet and get it done. But our main point too here is get it done as efficiently and as frugally as possible. Don't rag the puck for years and years. Don't inflate the contracts. Don't increase the costs. Do it as cheaply as you possibly can, but at least get it done so we have something to show for it.
I can't agree more with that. Last thing on BC Hydro, the NDP promised a rate freeze during the last election campaign. Where do you think that fits into all this? Do you think that that's actually a huge mistake, given we've already seen a $600 million increase in the cost that'll have to be passed on to ratepayers? So by freezing rates, could we see an artificial, and I know Kathleen Wynne is trying to do this now in Ontario, it's not working. By freezing rates, could we actually see an even larger jump after the freeze is over that would really actually hammer people even harder?
In most cases, that's just the usual way of economics. So if you try to put pause on something, which costs are actually increasing behind the curtain, once the election happens or once the curtain is pulled back, depending on whatever happens, no matter what party, no matter what province, you're going to have an increase in rates. And so what we would like to see is an actual reduction in the cost of producing the electricity, get it done as cheaply and efficiently as possible, and bring ratepayers the best cost of energy you possibly can get. And so that's why we're saying don't paper things over, don't pretend it's not there, don't try to artificially reduce rates, make sure that the mean cost of electricity and the production of that electricity is affordable. And in this case, British Columbians are used to hydroelectricity costs, so at least that seems the best way to go forward. We're really worried about hyperinflating the cost of electricity through things like wind and solar.
I can't agree more. It's like the one thing that is actually affordable in the city of Vancouver is hydroelectricity so far. So let's not screw that up like we've screwed up everything else as far as affordability in this province. Anyway, for the Rebel.Media, we're very pleased to be joined by Kris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I'm Christopher Wilson. Thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, make sure you click subscribe on the Rebel Canada YouTube page. And if you really want to help us out, go check out our premium content at therebel.media/shows. Become a premium member. You'll get access to exclusive content.